All right, and I want to welcome you back for another installment of Math with Medina. So we're going to look at today is solving equations by using addition and subtraction. And specifically, we're going to try and connect this back to using mental math that we talked about in the last video. All right, so most importantly, we walk away really with understanding this phrase, inverse operations. And that's just simply two operations that undo each other. For example, if I have subtraction, in order to undo subtraction, I would use addition. And if I wanted to undo division, I would use multiplication. So again, it's that idea of we have operations that have a relationship with one another, that multiplication and division are opposites. And today we're really going to be looking at that relationship between addition and subtraction being opposites. All right, so what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how to solve this equation if I use mental math, and then take that next step mathematically of looking at how to solve this equation by using subtraction. And we'll talk about why we know it's subtraction here in 1 minute. So if I look at this problem, I say, okay, I want to discover what x is. And I have x plus 3 equals 8. So most of us at this point pretty confidently would predict, using mental math, that x should equal or does equal 5. Now remember that whenever we get a solution or we get a value for a variable, it's really important that we prove our answer. So we start out, and first things first, we write down the original equation exactly as it shows. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and substitute in the value of the variable that we found. So we found in this case that x would equal 5, so you can see we substituted that in right here. Now from here, it's really important if we're proving our solution, just like we talked about in the last video, that we evaluate both sides of our equation to get to our true statement, or to get to the smiley face of knowing that we're correct. So that's using mental math, which in most cases is just making a very educated guess. Now in this time we're going to look at how do I solve the exact same equation using subtraction. So we start out, and every time we do an equation we write down the original equation, and then we show our steps. So in this case, I'm going to want to get rid of the 3 over here to isolate my variable or get it by itself. So we're going to go ahead and take away 3 from both sides. And in doing so, we're going to get x equals 5. So you can see we got the exact same solution as before, but this time we actually have math showing how we came up with that solution. And again, we want to make sure that we prove our answer. So we write down the original equation, substitute in a value for our variable, and we evaluate both sides. 5 plus 3 equals 8, 8 equals 8, and we know that that's a true statement. So this time it tells us that our solution is x equals 5. And you can see we have the same solution in both cases. Alright, so now I want to give you a practice problem for you to do it yourself. So what I want you to do is, just like we did before, use that subtraction property of equality. And when we say subtraction property of equality, it's just the idea that says to keep this equation equal, I need to subtract on both sides of my equation. So go ahead, take a minute and do that right now, please. Alright, so in order to solve this, we're going to want to isolate that variable. So let's see if your answer matches mine. So we start out, and the first thing we're going to do, we said, was get rid of that 7. Well, to get rid of it, I'm going to have to subtract 7 from both sides. Because just like we worked on the last unit, 7 take away 7 would make 0, or would cancel out, so that would give us x equals, and 11 take away 7 would give us 4. So this would be our solution. And from there, we need to prove our solution, so we're going to always make sure we do our proof. So we write down our original equation, x plus 7 equals 11. Substitute in our value for x, which in this case we got was 4. And then remember that we need to evaluate both sides of the equation. 4 plus 7 makes 11. And we can see from there we have our true statement. So that tells us that x is equal to 4, that 4 is the solution to our equation. Alright, so that's using the subtraction property of equality, with again the idea being that we want to be able to subtract that 7 away from the x and get the x all by itself. So now let's look at the addition property. Very similarly, now we're going to solve by using addition. And the way that we know it's addition is we can see right here that the 4 is being subtracted from the y. So we want to get rid of that or isolate the y. So if I look at this, okay, what number take away 4 equals negative 6? I think it might be 2. Negative 2. So we look and we say, okay, I want to prove my answer. So I write down my original equation, and I put in negative 2. And I don't really like negative subtracting more numbers, so I'm actually going to turn this into an addition problem. So remember, any subtraction can turn into addition. And negative 2 plus negative 4 would give us negative 6. Now that one, I'm betting most of us, the mental math into things might have been a little bit more challenging. So let's look at how we can do this really quickly using our ability of the addition property of equality. So we rewrite our original equation, and we say, okay, I want to get rid of the 4, so I'm going to add it to both sides. So I can go ahead, cancel the 4 out here, and that would leave us with just a y on that side. And negative 6 plus 4, well, if I'm at negative 6 on the number line, I'm going to come back 4 to the right. I'm going to end up at negative 2. And I want to prove my answer like always, so I rewrite. So to check my answer, I rewrite the original problem. And oops, I plug in for y, my solution, which we got was negative 2. And negative 2 take away negative 4, we know equals negative 6. Because remember that we could always, if we wanted, turn it into an addition problem just like we did here. So in this case, what that tells us is that y equals negative 2 is our solution, or is the value for the variable. Alright, so now I want you to have a chance to practice the addition property of equality. Let's go ahead and take a minute here, pause the video, and complete this practice problem. Alright, so let's take a look at this. You can see the first thing I did was using that addition property of equality, or the idea, the statement of this addition property of equality is just this rule here that says you have to keep it equal or balanced on both sides. So if you do something to one side, it's important you do it to the other. So you can see I added 6 to both sides. So in this case, this 6 is going to cross out, and that's going to leave me just with the x by itself on that left side. And on the right side, 1 plus 6 is 7. Now, one technique I might recommend for some of us that want to work on being organized is put a line from equal sign down. And you can see it's kind of like a wall on both sides. So we'll practice that more on these next slides. So after we do our problem, we always need to check it. So we check our solution, x minus 6 equals 1. And we put in 7 for our solution this time around. 7 take away 6 equals 1. When I evaluate that, 7 take away 6 does equal 1. So what this tells me is that that's true, which means that this is my solution. Alright, so now what I want to do is we're going to do 3 more practice problems. So here's 3 problems to look at. What I'd like you to do right now is pause the video one more time and go through and complete each of the 3 of these using the addition or subtraction property, whichever is appropriate on that problem. And then when you start the video back up, what you'll actually see is the problems will be completed with their solutions and with the checking, and I'm just going to talk through those. Alright, and welcome back. Let's take a look at all 3 of these together. So as we look at each one of these, I really want you to focus as I talk through kind of steps in organizing. So you can see on this first one here, we started out and we saw that we had 8 being added, so I needed to subtract that from both sides. One of the really important things about putting a line right down the equal signs there is it kind of creates 2 sides to your equation. So it's really important that it reminds you to keep things balanced or equal on both sides. So whenever I have to subtract something from one side, it's important that I do the exact same thing to the other. And 19 take away 8 would give us 11. And you can see back down here we double checked by plugging in our answer after we wrote down the original equation we started with. And we got that, in fact, that's a true statement, so we know that x is equal to 11. On the next one with n, we can see n take away 4 equals negative 11. Well, if I want to get rid of that 4, or get the n by itself, isolate it, then I'm going to need to do the opposite operation. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. And negative 11 plus 4 would get us closer towards 0 on the number line, or to negative 7. And you can see we substituted that back in here to the original equation. We checked our answer. And this part of things, I really made a point of reminding you, you can turn a negative and a subtraction into negative 7 plus negative 4. And we can see that, in fact, we got a true statement once again. This last one's a little bit more difficult because I flipped things around. But if you notice again, On all three of these, I put that wall right down the middle to separate both sides of our equal sign, or separate our two expressions. So you can see we had 13 being added, so I needed to do the inverse operation, so I subtracted it on both sides. -7 take away 13 more would give me -20. And to double check that I'm correct, I wrote down my original equation here. I substituted in the value for my solution, which in this case was -20. And then I checked my answer and I saw that in fact I was correct. I really want to stress for you a couple really great things you can do to help yourself be organized. One is to put this line right down the middle of your equation on both sides of our equal sign to separate, turn it into two separate kind of statements or two separate sides of our problem. The other side of things, it's really important that you write down the original equation when you're checking and that you clearly substitute in the value on each one of those as you go. All right, well, I hope that you have your notes all ready for class tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you first thing in the morning. Talk to you later.